Welcome to the first of our new podcast and video series, Grove Bites. If you haven't heard of Grove Books before, then we're a charity that produces books of around 10,000 words on a whole variety of subjects, exploring both the practical issues and also what the Bible has to say about them. And our subjects range from the Christian principles behind leadership, to education in our schools, to mission and evangelism, and much more. They are introductions to a topic, and they're written by people who know what they're doing, not what they're writing about. And we might describe them as bite-sized. In other words, they're books you can read in an hour or so, which spark thinking, open up areas, and provide further reading. And there are three of us in the Grove Bites team. That's myself, Richard Steele, Alex Guest, and Steve Morris. So I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves as well. Alex, can you introduce yourself?
I'm Alex. I am a member of the board for Grove Books, and during the day I am also the priest in charge of the Collier Row, the Extinction, and Marksgate St Mark's Church. So 2 churches under my belt. And in my spare time, I'm also really interested in artificial intelligence and the way that artificial intelligence is shaping and impacting our faith, not least as artificial intelligence generates artificial faith.
Something we'll maybe follow up on later ourselves, Alex. That's a great one. And Steve, can you introduce yourself?
Yeah, I'm Steve Morris. I'm the vicar at St Cuthbert's, North Wembley, which is just really pretty close to Wembley Stadium. So I'm in urban London. Before I was a vicar, I ran a brand agency and I worked as a journalist. So I've got a background in the media. And I suppose that's my great interest really, is how do we communicate the faith? How do we make the faith attractive? How do we explain it? And how do we deal with people's questions and queries humbly, to make the church a place, not that they fear, but they actually can't wait to come to?
Thanks, Steve. And I'm Richard Steele, and I'm chair of Grove Books. And in my day job, I lead the mission team for the Church of England across Lincolnshire. My particular interests, I guess, are how the Christian faith connects with everyday life, helping those who have little knowledge of Jesus or the Bible or certainly the church investigate the claims of faith. So today we're looking at 3 of our new Grove books from the series that look both at ethics and spirituality. And they all pick up on big issues, some really big issues facing us in the world today. COVID, fake news, the effects of digital technology and the environment, often in interesting combinations. So first, Steve, tell us a little bit about the book you've been reading.
Well, it's called Responding to Post-Truth. It's really, really interesting, really, because it actually looks square in the eye, the fact that we live in a world where there's a great mistrust of truth, the truth. And it asks what that might mean for the church, because clearly, if that's true, if people no longer believe in propositional truth, we're going to have to communicate the truth that we have completely differently and be open to their stories as well. It's fascinating, it's very good, it's beautifully written, and it's got some very interesting tips for what church can do to become a storytelling, a listening place. And of course, the wonderful thing is it's come out at exactly the right time.
I think you're absolutely right, Steve. I sometimes characterize it that people have talked about us being in the midst of 3 pandemics. Obviously the coronavirus pandemic, climate change and all the issues around that, and racism, which has really come to the fore in the past few months. But with these pandemics, I say very clearly there's a 4th pandemic, which is disinformation. The whole realm of disinformation means that actually we can't really, I believe, fight and beat these other 3 pandemics if we can't beat the pandemic of disinformation. That means that when you have a discussion, not everyone agrees on the same set of facts. So it's very hard to have a discussion or have a meeting of minds.
What really interests me about the book is I think it's completely on the money. And I wonder what we think about that, because if we do live in this post-truth age, if there's a real suspicion of, as it were, the official lines of truth, then that is going to really change the way we do ministry. And I'm interested in how we might, pick the opportunity up that's clearly there to listen to people and to hear their stories, and I mean, just the thing is, the church has been very hierarchical. We've just expected people to turn up and listen. Well, what's the world like when we can no longer expect that? What does the Church of England do? What does the church do?
What advice can we give them, I wonder? I think I would also think about this issue of, well, this is your truth, this is my truth. And, you know, so almost people say, well, truth doesn't really matter as well. So there's the whole fake news, there's the whole conspiracy theory thing, which does worry me a lot, to be honest. But then there is also the, how do we, you know, accept other people's truth, but also be honest to ourselves. And I know that's something that Peter takes up.
And one thing that I was left thinking about was that the one who shouts loudest is the one who is heard and the one who is speaking truth. But for the church, are we not worried about not participating in the conversation at all, allowing our voices to diminish to such a volume that we are left out of the discussion of truth? Or, for example, Richard, you're saying, well, truth is relative and it doesn't matter as much. But we have an eternal truth in the gospel that we still need to champion. So we still need to perhaps be able to communicate it with a voice, but one that isn't aggressively shouting and one that doesn't dismiss the truths of other people.
Yeah, that takes me back right to Paul in Athens when he was just debating with the philosophers. And he first of all went round and looked and listened clearly, because he then was quoting some of their own philosophers, and then he opened up from his own, and he got some people dismissed him, but other people welcomed him. And I wonder if that's the sort of context that we have to allow other people to share their truths as well, and to listen really genuinely. And then that gives you the context, really, to share your story, doesn't it? I mean, I know, Steve, this is something you've written about, and the idea of telling our story. So I guess you've got some thoughts on this.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I wrote about is I used to go when it was still open to the Edinburgh Fringe, and I absolutely love the Edinburgh Fringe, because it's like, if the world was run by artists, that's what it would be like, you know. And I absolutely adore it, really. And the only two times I encountered, as it were, Christian truth was one with a man with a megaphone who's there every single year shouting at people, and another one was an invitation to go off to a Jesus event, to come and meet Jesus at the Fringe. Come away from the Fringe to meet Jesus. And my feeling is that, you know, he's already there. You know, he's already there in the singing and the dancing and the laughter, in the feasting, in the joy, in the family, in the community. I suppose what I want to reclaim, as it were, all the good things that are out there in the secular world, because they are from God. And our Celtic forebears understood this. They kind of baptized ordinary life with holiness. And I suppose my feeling is, you know, I've come to think that kind of bold declaration of this is the truth just is an utterly failed strategy. We have to start by listening and be prepared to put ourselves on the line, and maybe prepared to change our own minds if we hear any better evidence for anything else.
And Peter's book's a good way into this?
Oh, I think it's really, really readable. I read it really quickly. It was so easy to read, and it was really, really stimulating. Excellent book.
Thank you, Steve. Alex, what have you been reading?
I have been reading Reimagining Spiritual Disciplines for a Digital Age by Sarah Schumacher, who is a tutor at St. Mellitus College and a scholar in theology and the arts. And she explores 3 spiritual disciplines, particularly solitude, simplicity, and Sabbath, and thinks about how we can adopt them for a digital age. One of the things she does point out is that there's no escaping the digital world in which we're living in, and in which most people are now born into. I was really drawn to the discussion that we ended up having about solitude and how to tap into solitude in a digital world.
Yeah, I've got a really interesting thing about that, because I remember when I was at Wycliffe studying, and we had a brilliant spirituality teacher, and and most of my spiritual directors have pushed me towards solitude. And I am utterly rubbish at it. And I've come to the point that I just can't do solitude. It's bad for me. I mean, if I go and do solitude, if I'm on my own for more than about a day, I think it makes me ill. I just can't.
Well, this is one of the things I was thinking. Are we, sorry to interject so abruptly, but are we misunderstanding perhaps solitude as isolation and being alone? And actually, I think you can do solitude corporately. And as long as you are with people who are of the same mind and of the same heart. So I don't think solitude has to be equated to being alone. And certainly in the world in which we're living currently through a pandemic, that would be quite destroying for some people. And so doing that in a digital world becomes untenable, not just for your mental well-being, but practically as well.
Yeah, I certainly agree. And I think getting away from your phone, I mean, I realise I've become enslaved by my phone. I'm always checking the thing. But I suppose I'm just saying that some personality types may need a certain kind of solitude. And it's easy to kind of get quite legalistic about it, because whenever anyone's ever suggested solitude to me, it's always been about going off on my own. So before we were ordained, we had 3 days of silence, and it was the thing none of us needed. Not one of the ordinands needed that silence. We needed to talk to each other because we were scared as heck. We were really, really worried. We were churning, and forcing us to spend 3 days in our own room alone was just torture, you know. And I just thought that's a kind of puritanical evangelicalism really that's at work there. Then I'm much more of a liberal, I suppose. I just basically listen to the radio. I just wouldn't do it.
And yet it comes from different aspects of the church as well, doesn't it? You think of the Desert Fathers, they came from a very different place and wanted silence. And there are monastic orders that, you know, are totally in silence. Yeah, I don't think it would work for me either, personally. Alex, what about yourself?
I think, especially as a child of the digital age, perhaps formed and created in certainly in my adult life by technological advances, it would be impossible for me to escape technology and digital platforms for too long without having some form of an anxiety, a wave of anxiety, or feeling a loss of control. And I think that's really important. I think what I have been thinking about is that idea that solitude doesn't have to mean that I'm alone, and it doesn't have to mean a complete withdrawal from digital platforms or technology. But what I am becoming more conscious of is who are the other voices in that solitude then? Because if I believe that we can embark in solitude corporately and with other people who are of the same mind, does that mean that, for example, the applications that I have on my phone, are there voices that are joining in that conversation without my control or a consent? So, for example, I was watching a TV program earlier. The speaker said Assyrian, and Siri popped up on my phone and said, "What can I help you with?" And then I went to send a message on WhatsApp, and it says WhatsApp is owned by Facebook, and therefore all the conversations that I'm having on WhatsApp are also being monitored for algorithms and for sales purposes by Facebook teams who can then tailor adverts to me. So whilst I can create spaces of solitude using digital platforms, and I can create and engage with other people digitally in order to find spaces of solitude, I also have to now be hyper aware of technology's, you know, hidden ear in all of those conversations and in that solitude. And so for me, solitude is about privacy and being away from other distractions, but technology doesn't have to be a distraction in itself.
I suppose, as I write about in my book, I've personally found, and this could be personal to me, but I suspect probably not, is that to create this space in my mind, I've had to create space for my phone with my body, and I think that's partly it's meant then that I'm not spending my energy trying to not think about my phone and not be distracted by it, and so I think it can be an aid, but unless we're really disciplined and we know its impact on us and we've taken that time to reflect on our own practice, I think it does get in the way. I think it can get in the way, and I would say that I think even if it can aid, solitude should include time away from technology as well. And I think that's what's been really fascinating by this particular season, is that the disciplines that I advocate have like popped up everywhere, like when talking about like what's our well-being in this time, and it's all about having time away from your screen. You know, it's partly, I think what solitude does is, of course, for a Christian, it allows us that space to be alone with God,
Interesting to hear her comments and how she wrestles with the technology herself. Alex, what sort of people would you recommend this book to?
I think that this book is intergenerational for those who are adults who have just started to engage with technology, for children who have always been informed by technology, for parents, for those without children, for teachers, for students. It's applicable right across the board because it also offers some practical advice about how to withdraw or how to tap into these spiritual disciplines, as well as a good biblical foundation for them.
Great, thanks very much, Alex. A wide-ranging audience indeed. And I've been reading COVID-19, Environment, Justice and the Future, which again was a really interesting read. And this one has 4 authors, all very, very well qualified. And they were discussing in different ways how COVID is a wake-up call for us, and how the way we deal with it and commit ourselves to build back better. That's a phrase that's being bounced around a bit now, isn't it? And many people are hoping for that. They're saying this is really vital to the future of our planet. So I talked to a couple of the authors, firstly Dr. Ruth Valerio, and she works at Tear Fund. And so I asked her to say a little bit about how important the environment was to the situation of the kind of people that Tear Fund work with, the more vulnerable people around the world.
The environment is so important when we think about issues of global poverty, and it used to be that those things were kept very separate. You had your environmental organisations and you had your aid and development organisations, and never the twain shall meet, and they'd kind of argue a bit between them as to which of their agendas was most important. But actually things like climate change have showed us that you just can't keep those things separate. So you can't care for people without thinking about the land they live off, the seas they fish in, the air that they breathe. And you can't think about or care for the wider natural world without thinking about the people who inhabit those spaces and the impact that they cause. And when we look at climate change, we know that this isn't only an environmental issue. It's also an issue that is causing terrible problems to millions of people around the world.
One point that the book makes really very strongly is that the church has only comparatively recently got a role in this. And some of the authors, when I was talking to them about this, saying actually, go back 20 years and to get somebody talking about the environment is really unusual. But now there seems to be a lot about the environment within the Christian church. Is that your experience, Alex, Steve?
Definitely my experience, and certainly the urgency with which we need to start paying attention has ramped up with Extinction Rebellion and with lots of climate change groups popping up throughout the church. It's something that's been brought to the forefront, I found, in the last 5 years, a lot more so than a longer term experience.
Extinction Rebellion, you refer to that, and there are a number of Christians within that, and some people feel maybe that's a step too far. That's quite controversial. So it's not without it sort of a controversial aspect, is it, this side of things?
No, I think that's right. I think, you ask why maybe the church has been so slow. And I think, I'm a, evangelical. I came to faith in a charismatic church. And I think there's something about the doctrine, the teaching of the evangelical and charismatic church, that's why it happened. If you are completely focused on individual salvation and getting people to say a certain prayer and then be saved, and then they steam off in the ocean-going liner to heaven and leaves everyone else behind. If your whole focus is on personal charismatic experience, hearing a worship band, falling over, whatever it might be, then really the rest of it's all peripheral, because as long as I'm saved, I'm okay. And I have a deep suspicion that there was a selfishness, a kind of consumerism at the heart of that kind of expression of the faith. And I'm just so mightily relieved that we have rediscovered creation and understand that, God's in it and it's important. But I do think there was a kind of massive structural theological problem. It wasn't just that we forgot, we deliberately ignored. because we didn't think it was important.
And there are other people who say, well, actually, because we're all going to heaven, it doesn't matter what we do with the world. I mean, that's another strand which I find I struggle with. In fact, people might want to read Tom Wright on that, because it's not going up to a sort of ethereal heaven; it's a brand new heaven and earth created together. So what we do with this earth does matter. But it is a subject that divides people a little bit, doesn't it? But again, it's interesting how it reflects back to the COVID situation. Is that making us think a little bit more about what a crisis can do to this world, I wonder? I think it seems to
absolutely. And I think it also highlights the disparity between the wealthy and the poor. And that obviously has global ways of rearing its head across those who are more likely to be victims of climate change, disasters, extreme weather, are those who are often living in poorer or less economically developed countries.
I think that's a good cue for our second clip there, Alex, because Martin Hodgson, who I also spoke to, said, this isn't a natural disaster. It is our fault. And particularly the exploitation side. So I sort of just put back to him a little bit, how much responsibility, because we as individuals, particularly in the West, how much individual responsibility can we be expected to have?
Been a great leveler. Early on in the pandemic, people were saying, oh yes, well, the Prime Minister can get COVID, so it's a great leveler, but it isn't. What has happened is that the rich people, by and large, have done a lot better during the pandemic than poor people. The BAME community have done particularly badly as a result of the pandemic. So there is a very considerable justice issue in this whole thing. What has happened, of course, is that people like me have been able to work at home a lot of the time, keep away from areas where the virus is prevalent, whereas poorer people have to work in those environments and are more likely to catch it. And so there is a very serious justice issue with this whole thing.
And so Martin, the second author, there's two others as well, and it's an amazingly concentrated book, within under 10,000 words. I think one of the chapters that actually looks at where COVID might have come from is, I think, one of the best short ways of looking at that, short narratives about the possibilities of where COVID comes from. And of course, we don't know that yet, exactly where, but it was really well put. It was really well looked at the various possibilities. But each of the chapters takes a particular theme about building back better and homes in on it. We're near the end today, but I just wonder if anybody's got any final comments about either that book or the ones that the other ones we've been reading today.
I really agree with you, Steve, about the fact that there has been a biblical or theological shift in the church over recent years in terms of engagement with environmental topics. I wholly believe that we are not born into individualism. We are born into a family of God with responsibilities for that wider family and for the earth that we are gifted. And I just hope that shift hasn't come too late.
Yeah, I completely echo that. I mean, I think, I'm in my 50s, and I think we're being led by younger people. My daughters, one of them's 20, one's 23, and I'm learning from them. I'm learning from them about compassion. I'm learning from them about how to care for the planet. I'm learning about inclusivity with people of all different kinds and beliefs. And I suppose, in a way, I've got this funny feeling that people of my age might have to step aside a bit quicker. I don't want to hang on. I just think we've done our bit. Let's let younger people do it, because they're going to be much better than our generation has been.
If we're going to get into the age thing, Steve, maybe I should step aside even quicker. But anyway, let's pass on from that. That's it for today. Thank you for watching. You've been watching what I'm describing as the tasting menu, if you like, for Grove Bites. The clips we played today are all part of longer reflections, sort of 5, 6, 7 minutes, that sort of length. And you can find those on our YouTube channels and also as individual podcasts. If you go to grovebooks.co.uk and follow the links. So for now, it's goodbye from Grove Bites.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. We hope to see you again soon.